Some of you may recall a question I got from Micah on Patreon last month about Paramount Pictures, and now he has a new question, this time about Netflix. Do you think Netflix should be up for Oscars, Emmys, or both? This comes from a recent comment Steven Spielberg made a while back. For those of you who don't know, Steven Spielberg recently remarked in an interview that he thinks Netflix movies, because they primarily play on their streaming service and don't have a standard theatrical release, should not be allowed to compete for Oscars and should be considered television instead. Spielberg is not the only person in Hollywood to feel that way, and Mudbound, getting 4 Oscar nominations this year, was considered a major moment for Netflix. Now, personally, I've long held the opinion that a film can only compete for an Oscar or Emmy, not both. You're either a theatrical release or television movie. This was a major discussion a few years back when the documentary Okja Made in America won the Best Documentary Oscar. The filmmakers said they intended the documentary to be an 8-hour film, not a miniseries. But then it went on to win Emmys, not for the entire documentary, but specifically the directing in Part 3 and the editing in Part 4. The Academy changed the rules so that multi-part series could not compete for the Best Documentary Oscar, and I don't blame them for being perturbed. As for Netflix, it is a whole new distribution model. They do give certain films a limited theatrical run to make them eligible for Oscars, while also making them available on their streaming service the same day. Theater owners and in-street people don't think too highly of that, as they find it dilutes the theatrical experience. However, despite the multitude of content Netflix releases, they know exactly what audience their works cater to. They're not giving these Oscar-eligible runs to movies like The Ridiculous Six. It's films like Okja and Mudbound that appeal mostly to cinephiles, the latter of which was not even produced by Netflix. They just acquired Mudbound at Sundance. Bong Joon-ho did not direct Okja with the mindset that it was a television movie. Despite Netflix funding his movie, he still treated it as a cinematic experience, and it should be treated as such. Netflix is not even the first distribution company to do the one-week qualifying run. G-Kids has done this for years to make their films eligible for Oscars, and then they'll give them an official release shortly after the nominations are announced to capitalize on them. And even then, G-Kids releases unfortunately don't go wider than a few hundred screens. Netflix's Oscar-winning documentary Icarus would probably struggle to get a large audience with a conventional theatrical release, but a lot of people are able to view it easily without the hassle of traveling a long distance to reach an art house showing of the film. I think that's the neat thing about Netflix. They are funding these well-received films by notable filmmakers and making sure they reach a large audience. Now, like I said before, I do think there should be a distinction between an Oscar-eligible film and an Emmy-eligible film, and Netflix does muddy the waters somewhat. However, since they did fill the proper requirements to make Icarus, Okja, and Mudbound eligible for Oscars, they were allowed to compete. Those films even played at film festivals months before appearing on Netflix, so the first audiences did see them on a big screen before they hit the streaming service. But once they do submit them for Oscars, they should back out of the Emmys. I only really have one major problem with Netflix's model of distribution. Unless they invest a lot of money like they did with Bright and the Cloverfield Paradox and Okja, or they feel there is some prestige factor involved like with Mudbound, their marketing tends to be pretty underwhelming. They will release a trailer on their YouTube page a few weeks before the film hits Netflix, and it might be featured on the main page for a day or two, but they otherwise just stick a film on their Netflix service and see if an audience finds it. Mudbound was not the only movie they bought at Sundance last year, but I'm sure most people aren't aware of the other titles. Anyway, I went on a few tangents there, but I hope I answered your question the best way I could, Micah.